And hello, everybody. Welcome to Double Crossed Radio. Another episode coming to you this week from the hopefully soon-to-be Republic of Jefferson. And I have tonight with me my co-host Drew Lamb. Welcome, Drew.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? How's it going, Chuck?
It's going great. The remodeling is going great in the house. We finished the carpet laying today. We just have a few more things to do, and I won't have to spend so much time breaking my back after working all day.
Well,
it's looking great. I'm very happy. I'm here in the new Double Cross Radio Studios, high atop my house.
well, you did a damn fine job. You're a great carpenter.
Oh, thank you. Well, you haven't seen the finished part yet. It's getting better and better and better. I'm really excited about this. This is. Well, enough about that. We're not here to talk about that tonight. We're here to talk about last week's show, because I hate to say this just because I don't want to brag about myself, but I was very proud of that show. That was the best show we've ever done.
I think it was our most important show, and I think that everything that we've done since we launched the show was leading up to that show.
Yeah.
That's the reason behind everything that we work for.
I agree, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I listened to it 3 times while I was working on stuff in the house here. I was painting and doing things like that, and I would listen to it and I was, wow, this is so good. This is still really fascinating to listen to. I was there live, and I'm listening to the record thing, and it's still fascinating, and I want to listen to it again as soon as it's over. And I started having more thoughts about it. When I wasn't listening to it, I would keep thinking about things I had heard during it. And, anyway, in case some of you people weren't listening to last week's, I know a lot of the people in chat were here. We had Gary and Tiso. Oh no, Gary Lake and Anthony and Tiso. Boy, that's started off well here. They were our guests last week, and they gave us a history and legal reasons for the original State of Jefferson movement, the reason why they abandoned it, and the reason why they've now taken up the cause for Republic of Jefferson instead of the State of Jefferson. And if you missed last week's show, I think you should check it out in the archives. We have it on a podcast in the archives, and you can also see it on the UCY YouTube channel.
Yeah, all of our shows now, they automatically archive, and they've done that for quite some time, so you could grab the MP3 for that. And then they automatically upload to the UCY YouTube channel. So everything goes up there. We don't do a video podcast, I guess. No, even if we did a video podcast, Chuck, it would still get uploaded as audio to the UCY, but we could do it as video.
Yeah, we could do a video thing and
to our
later.
Channel.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it'd be a bit more work, but
we could do that. And now that I have a nice background for the camera shot, it'd be worth doing.
Yeah, and I could set up my little studio over here.
Mm-hmm.
And,
we'll split the screen, and we could be talking.
Yeah, there we go. I don't know what I'll have to have on the background. Right now the wall in my future studio is painted pink. I don't think I look very good in front of a pink background.
The thing about this, I think, would be most interesting when there's all those annoying background noises. You'll be able to see what's happening that caused that, and you'll be able to type in the chat, or we could stream it live.
Oh, like having a Chihuahua or a Rottweiler.
Yeah, or
carrying on.
Last week it was the noises you guys were hearing were actually the noises of my pen on a piece of paper. It must have been really close to the microphone because it was drowning out everything else. And I was writing too noisily. Sounded like World War III. But anyway, if you didn't get a chance to hear that show, or even if you listened to it and maybe you'd like to listen to it again to catch some of those points. So even if you don't live in this region, wherever you are, you're facing the same problems that the people of this region face, and our government is out of control. And I think that the one conclusion that we came to, and we must have stated this 4 or 5 times during the show is that, as much as we support the state of Jefferson movement, the real problem isn't Sacramento, California and the government of California. The real problem is Washington D.C. and the government of the United States of America. And that's what's causing all the problems. The state of California didn't set up NSA. The state of California doesn't have the Patriot Act. The state of California doesn't collect income taxes. The state of California doesn't have a Federal Reserve System that destroys our money. The big problems, the ones that are our biggest problems in our society, are all coming out of Washington D.C. So that's the past. Those are things that happened in the past. And I kind of getting ahead of myself here. I want to talk to you more about my frame of mind. And interrupt at any time, Drew, during this time, as this is I think this should be kind of a conversation as well as a kind of a report on my week. But every time I listen to this show, that I seem like a new thoughts would form. And the cause of the Jefferson Republic seemed to become more and more important every time I listened to it. And it wasn't that I realized why it was more important, just that it was a kind of an inner sense, kind of like it was like a thought that wasn't quite formed, but it was telling me, this is really, really important, Chuck. Pay attention. And I realized that the cause hadn't changed, but my view of how important of it was changing. And there was something changing in the way I was thinking, and I couldn't quite figure it out yet. I had other things being distracted. I have a lot of work to do here still at my house. Moving furniture is the next thing we have to do. But I had to get ready for the carpet guys today, and so I had a lot of other things going on at times, and I'd get interrupted because we have to take care of our dogs, and there's just always something going on. And I finally got a chance to. It's actually the times when I get to think the most when I'm out driving on my delivery route, because there's nothing else to do but either listen to the radio or think. So I turned the radio off and I would just think about the show. And I started to kind of get some of these ideas. One of the things that just kind of kept popping in my head kept thinking about Hong Kong. I said, why am I thinking about Hong Kong? And it's, I don't know if any of you subscribe to this notion that you have a subconscious mind and it thinks 24/7, 365. It never stops thinking. It's always creating ideas and whatever, but it doesn't always, those ideas don't always make it into your conscious mind unless you allow them to flow in there. So you kind of have to empty your mind of other thoughts to let those thoughts become aware of them. And at least that was how it works for me. And driving is a state of mind where that happens for me. Well, I knew one thing that the most important thing about forming a republic instead of a state is going to be the future, not the past. So what's going to happen tomorrow, not what happened yesterday. There's still things that they're going to have to account for and deal with that are part of the past, but they can't change any of that stuff. The only thing they can change is the future, and the future is their ability to deal with those things. Their future is the ability to become prosperous, and their future are things that they can change the direction they're going. They can go in a better direction. They can, these are all things I already knew, but I was thinking, well, why am I thinking about Hong Kong? So I said, maybe I should just find out. I'll study Hong Kong for a day or so and find out if I can figure out why is this becoming so important to me. So I sat down and started reading. I went to Wikipedia and read their history of Hong Kong. It was very interesting. And then the points that I thought were kind of important or seemed like they were important as I was reading them, I did further research on those items. And one of them that stood out were the Opium Wars. I don't know how many of you out there understand the history of China or ever heard of it, but Hong Kong was once part of the China. It was claimed as China. It wasn't a separate entity as it is now. It's still claimed by China now, but it's kind of it's an unusual arrangement. I'll put it that way. It's hard to describe easily. It's part of the country, but it's kind of ruled by China, but it's not ruled by China. It still has its own independent governorship, and so on and so on. But the way it came to be what it is today is kind of an interesting journey. So I'm going to, before I tell you why I kept thinking about Hong Kong and why it actually led to some of the conclusions I've made. I want to fill you in on this history. I'm going to keep you in suspense for a while I fill you in on this on all this stuff. Hong Kong is the number one economy in the world, in case you didn't know. That's not China, that's Hong Kong, just Hong Kong. It's about 400 square miles, 426 square miles, I think so it said. That's not very big. I mean, Jackson County is, 10 times that size. So it's small. It's a little bit bigger than Medford. That's about it. And it's hasn't always been the number one economy in the world. And I think there's history from where they were to where they are now it shows a good lesson, and it also shows, reading all this stuff was very instrumental in kind of these ideas I had kind of coming to the front of my mind and being able to express them for you guys on the show. But anyway, opium has long been known in China as having some medicinal properties, and they knew it had some bad parts of it also. And I think the first recorded, those of you who know anything about China know that they have recorded every single day of their history for the last 4,000 or 5,000 years. It's amazing history. That's just as a side note. I'm gonna get
actual history or revisionist history.
Actual history. These are written accounts of what happened it's almost like a diary of the country through all the different emperors. Marco Polo claimed to have been in China. In fact, that's what's taught in history books, that he established an overland trade route to China and back, and he'd gone to all these places. They have everything he talks about in his stories about China are recorded in the written histories of China, but he is never mentioned. And other visitors to the courts and people that were there who are Europeans or traders or whatever are mentioned, but he is never mentioned in that. That's why a lot of historians doubt that he really actually ever made it to China. They think he probably made it as far as a trading outpost, probably on the Black Sea, maybe in Odessa. And he would hear these stories from the traders that were coming from China and repeat them. That's just kind of an aside, just kind of always has interested me. That he was probably a fake, but it was still important what he did. Anyway, back to China and opium. Anyway, in their recorded histories, its references to opium started showing up in about the 7th century. So it's been going on there for quite a few years. Like I said, they used it mostly for some medicinal purposes. I don't know if any of you saw the movie recently it was based on the book. There was a true account it's called Lone Survivor. The Navy SEAL that was, he was in a group of 4 and they were attacked by, Taliban forces or Al-Qaeda forces or whoever. They were attacked in Afghanistan, and the other 3 people were killed, and he managed to escape, and, he was rescued by some villagers. And they protected him from Al-Qaeda or whoever it was long enough. And they actually even went to the American Army base or Navy, wherever the base was, and had the helicopter come in and rescue him. But while he was there, they gave him opium to help him with his pain, because he was in so much pain he couldn't sleep. He was having trouble eating, and the opium kind of relieved him. Well, it kind of made the time go by for him, and he was able to heal. So, I mean, that's in that area of the world, they've known that if you don't overdo it, it does have some uses medically. But it wasn't until the 17th century, and when China began to interact with European traders, that the practice of mixing opium with tobacco for smoking was introduced into China. And this was something that was brought to them by the Europeans. And once it started to be imported in there, the emperor saw that this was having some negative effects on some of the people, and some people just, they get addicted to it and it just ruins their lives. And it's kind of the story of drugs, isn't it? So let's see, in the early 18th century, they passed a law restricting the use of opium, but they didn't really have any money or people to enforce it, so it was largely ignored. This is kind of like what happened in colonial America when the British were trying to collect tariffs on goods that were being traded between the Caribbean states and the New England states. And they were trying to get a tariff on everything that went back and forth between them, and so everything was being smuggled, but because they didn't have the money to put tax collectors on the scene, the laws were just kind of ignored. Anyway, in 1799, they passed a stricter law with harsher penalties. And by this time, the amount of, when they did the first law, they had approximately 200 chests of opium were coming into the country every year. And when they passed this new stricter law, by that time, the amount of opium had grown to 4,500 chests per year. And I imagine the chest would be somewhat like your basic treasure chest, like you maybe see depicted in the movies. So something of that size. And just as in American drug wars, making something that was popular illegal only seemed to increase the demand. And boy, we've seen that happen here, haven't we? By 1830, 40,000 chests per year were arriving in China via the British East India Company. This was all coming from India, hence the name East India Company. The opium trafficked into China came from the East India Company's operations in Bengal, part of the British India at the time. And in the 1820s, opium from non-British controlled parts of India entered the lucrative market. And as prices fell due to competition, the production was stepped up. So, I'm not sure that is accurate economically. I'm just reciting things or writing down things that I found in the different sources that I found. I think that prices fell due to increased supply. It wasn't the other way around. As they got competition, brought more and more product to the marketplace, the prices would have to fall in order to sell all of the product. That makes a lot more sense to me economically. So I think they're probably wrong how they said that. Anyway, the opium was carried to the coast of China by British shipping concerns, and this was part of their mercantilist system. That's one of the reasons why we had a revolution in the 18th century. The previous century, we couldn't get anything shipped to this country unless it was shipped on a British naval vessel, a British mercantile fleet or something, and it had to be stored in warehouses that were owned by the Hudson Bay Company or the East India Company or whatever company the crony capitalists in England had at that time. And yes, mercantilism is kind of the father to fascism. And that was the system of economic system that the British had at that time. And it's a very closed system. You notice American shipping interests couldn't enter into that. They weren't allowed to carry goods between Britain and the United States. They weren't allowed to carry goods between the United States and British colonies in the Caribbean. They weren't even allowed to carry goods between the colonies and non-British colonies because they were considered British subjects and they were subject to British law, which said everything had to be shipped in British ships. And so that caused a lot of problems. It was one of the leading reasons why our revolution happened. One of those American shippers who became a black marketer was a guy named John Hancock. Yeah, that John Hancock. And the money he made by shipping stuff back and forth was that's, his black market activities financed a large part of early part of our war effort. And he spent most of the fortune that he had accumulated, shipping things back and forth around the world, to finance this revolution, because he wanted to be free of that system where he couldn't compete unless he broke the law. So that was, and that's kind of important that this very same system was still being employed by the British, and it was still, I'm going to put this correctly, it was still causing irritation from the people that were not inside that system. If you're not inside that bubble or that bell jar, it's kind of keeps everybody else out. Only the people inside can work in the market system. Everybody else just has to be a serf. Well, this opium trade was very profitable, and the East India Company was becoming very wealthy due to it. And nothing that China did seemed able to stem this ever-growing demand for this product. It's a drug. People got hooked on it. They couldn't say no. And the drug kept flowing into that area. In fact, this drug even came over to America in the California Gold Rush. A lot of the Chinese that would come over to work on the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad, to work in the gold fields, whatever. There were a lot of Chinese, were early residents of, let's say not the earliest, but they were, 19th century residents of the Jefferson area up here, this region of Jefferson that we call they've hand dug a ditch, Sterling Creek, the Sterling Creek mine ditch. They hand dug that on grade, I should say, not on level, on grade. And it goes in and out of these canyons, and it's still largely there. It's been abandoned for many, many, many years. But a lot of it's still there and intact, and probably would be serviceable. And with just a few repairs here and there, they could probably have that thing up and running again. It was that well done. But these are all people coming over from China to work here in the west coast of America, and they brought a lot of that opium with them. And there was, you can find some references to that in some of the movies that were written of the late 19th century. One that comes to mind is Tombstone, which is fairly historically accurate from what I've been able to determine. And the marshal's wife gets hooked on, they call it laudanum, which was kind of an opium cough syrup. And she gets kind of hooked on it and strung out, and that's kind of the end of that. But that was not that uncommon to happen in there. It was the same thing happening to the Chinese people.
Chuck, if I could intervene for a moment.
Sure.
And many of the Chinese workers that were in this region, working on the railroads, for example, between what was now known as Southern Oregon and Northern California, they were very health conscious, and so they were very particular about what they ate. They liked fresh food. They liked fish. They bathed regularly, where the white workers, at least on the railways around here. I have a friend who's a local historian, and she's written about this. But the white workers would, just eat just poor junky food, would rarely take baths, didn't care too much about their health, probably wanted some whiskey more than anything. But I don't think that the Chinese workers could be considered junkies or anything like that. They were very much health conscious. And
probably
opium,
not the workers, but I think there probably some of the people that would follow the workers to these areas were.
Well, even the actual workers themselves, they definitely had a health conscious culture, and I don't think that opium was part of that, and I of course it is addictive, but I I don't know. I haven't heard of any accounts where it caused them problems. I mean, I could be wrong, of course. However, it was just part of their overall health regimen, you know?
Yeah, but I think it still was part of their, that's part of their culture that they brought with them.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
So, anyway.
Absolutely.
Back to China. They had all this demand. I keep getting all distracted because so much of this relates to things that happened in our history too. It's really interesting. But this caused a tremendous drain on silver in China because that's what they were using to buy the opium from the East India Company. The number of people addicted to the drug continued to increase. The amount of silver used to purchase the opium flowing out of China increased at the same time. The emperor now demanded some action be taken. And there were two different factions advising the emperor. One said, we need to legalize the opium, regulate it, and tax it so that China can share in these profits. And the other one said, this is an evil product. We need to crack down on the opium trade and stop it once and for all. We need to use the force of our emperor to end this plague on China. Well, the one that won out was the second one, the force and coercion. And we all know how, if you listen to this show regularly, you know what we think about how effective force and coercion is. And so, it didn't work so well. They went out there and they went into the areas along the coast where the opium trade was taking place, and they basically confiscated all the supplies they could. They took all the foreigners' properties, basically just confiscated it, told them to get out, and they destroyed it. And they made a big stink about that, and they thought, well, okay, that's that. We've stopped this. It's no longer going to be a problem. But the people that were there that were representing the East India Company, well, they had quite a bit of pull with the British government, as is the case with all crony capitalist systems. You can't tell me that General Electric doesn't have a lot of pull with the government of the United States. They're linked at the hip. So it's what's going on here in this country right now. But anyway, the East India companies, they sent requests to the government, and the government, to back them, they returned with an expeditionary force from India, which ravaged the English coast, and they just came in and took no prisoners. They just took care of any resistance and established themselves as we're here to sell the opium, we're here to trade with people, and stay out of our business, or you're going to have us to deal with. And the Chinese were so basically almost annihilated in the regions where the conflicts had taken place that they kind of surrendered, in a manner of speaking, but they accepted the terms of a new agreement, because basically the East India Company says, here's what we're going to do. It's kind of a mafia kind of tactic. Think of it, that's how it appears to me. It says, this is how the mop's going to flop, guys. And they accepted this new agreement with terms to trade, and one of the terms of it was that opium trade would be allowed to continue. But one of the other provisions was it would cede some territory to the East India Company, or Britain, I guess. And that territory included Hong Kong. And it unilaterally fixed Chinese tariffs at a low rate, which would promote trade and help the East India Company, because then they wouldn't have to pay these tariffs to the government. And it granted rights to foreigners in China, which were not reciprocated for Chinese in India or Great Britain or any place else in the British Empire. They also had a most favored nation clause and a diplomatic representation clause. I don't think those were very meaningful or powerful, but the court still refused, and this is the Chinese court, it refused to accept these ambassadors, and they obstructed the trade clauses of the treaties in order to try and get around them. They tried to find ways around them to still collect some duties on the stuff that was being brought into China. There were disputes over the treatment of British merchants in Chinese ports and in the seas, actually, and it led to a second Opium War, and that also ended badly for the Chinese. And they had a treaty of Tientsin. Now, these two treaties, the Treaty of Nanking, which was the first one, and the Treaty of Tientsin, were soon followed by similar treaties between China and the United States and China and France. And they later became known as the Unequal Treaties. And in China's history, they're known as the beginning of a century of humiliation. So that's how they saw this. Now, this was all taking place in the mid-19th century, around 1840s to 1850s, in that time period. By 1898, Great Britain wanted to have a formal agreement, a lease agreement, and they actually leased the area now known as Hong Kong from China. It was part of the British Empire, and it functioned as a British colony. But it was still, China didn't want to give up all outright ownership, and so they leased it to them. It had a 100-year lease, which just expired in 100 years from 1898 to 1998, and it was during the Clinton administration. And anyway, that at that time, Hong Kong was returned to China, and the British withdrew. Their leases expired. They didn't try and renew it or anything. Now, at the beginning of this 100 years, it was probably kind of an exploitive type of relationship between Great Britain and Hong Kong. This was a place, has a great natural harbor. It was very advantageous for them to have a place where they could go into port, not have excessive duties on their ships, and it gave them some advantages territorially. They had places all around the world at that time. It was said that the sun never sets on the British Empire, and Hong Kong was a key cog in that machine. But after World War I, there were a lot of other stuff happening in Britain. There were a lot of affairs that were more important and more pressing in detail. And so Hong Kong began to benefit from what I would call beneficial neglect, in that the governing body, which was to regulate and control whatever it is, kind of withdrew its attention from Hong Kong, and it began to develop naturally in a more of a free setting. They had very little attention paid to them by Britain. Britain had a lot of things going in and out. There was a worldwide depression, there was World War II, and they just keep on percolating along, creating institutions and figuring out how to do things better and improving their society and adopting free market principles almost by accident in some cases. But they were smart enough to read things like Adam Smith and some of the writings of economists like Ludwig von Mises. But before him, I'm trying to remember, it's von Barock. I can't remember all these, Joseph Menger, some of the great economists of the previous century. And they were able to grow into just this huge hub for international trade. And they still are, and they will be until we find a cheaper way to transport goods than water. Water is still the least expensive way to move product A anywhere in the world. If you can do it on water, it's going to save you money. And they have a great port. They have very little restrictions on anything. And because of that, they've grown into one of the most important places in the world. Now, they're also, as I mentioned right as I began this, Hong Kong is the number one economy in the world. Now, how did they get to this status? It's not just a port. They had a port before when they were being invaded by the East India Company, pretending to be representatives of Britain, or with Britain's blessings. However, Hong Kong is an isthmus. That's a hard word to say for me. It's kind of like Greece. Parts of Greece are. It's surrounded on three sides by water. It has a narrow neck that connects it to mainland China. And it really is kind of difficult to, I guess now that we have 20th century or 21st century methods of road building and such, it's a little bit easier for them to use motor freight to move goods from Hong Kong to China and back. But it's still easier for them to put it on a ship and move it out of the harbor and dock it in a harbor up the coast. And so it really has no natural resources. They have to import almost everything they consume, and that includes food and water. Yet despite all this, Hong Kong residents have higher per capita income, longer life expectancy, more economic freedom, and a higher IQ, average IQ, than the citizens of the United States. Now, the United States is very resource rich. And if you want to compare the potential for wealth and for a very affluent society, I would say the United States has much more potential than Hong Kong. But Hong Kong has, despite not having that potential, they've overachieved, while the United States is underachieving dramatically. So, I read somewhere, this is some time ago, I don't know if this is still true or not, but this was in the 1990s sometime, that 92% of the GDP of China was dependent on the economy of Hong Kong. Now, this was just prior to them being given back to China, basically, or the lease expiring, so China now would, I guess China never really gave up ownership of it, they just didn't have any control over it. So just prior to them, maybe 1998, just prior to 1998, and this is with Hong Kong still being controlled by Great Britain, 92% of the GDP of the whole entire nation of China was coming out of Hong Kong. Now, I'm sure that number is a little different today, as they've been trying to expand their economy throughout their country, and actually they've set up these economic zones that kind of come out in like little shells from Hong Kong. If you go inland, they'll have, they've kind of planned it out as central planners. That's all they do, is they try and organize, and they know better than anybody else, so they organize things that way. But, so they still have, now they have areas in the mainland that are producing more and more goods and services, but Hong Kong is still that's still the gear that's driving the whole machine. China, their whole economy, and the thing that develops all their wealth it's a freewheeling, free market economy. And China, seeing that is what is happening, they may have made a really wise decision to not interfere with the golden goose that's laying all the eggs. Or the goose that's laying the golden eggs, I should say. So I get that saying right. They don't want to slow down this egg production or stop the eggs from being produced at all. They see that that's the key to their future. And as time goes on, they'll probably adopt more and more free market principles in China as they understand how they are working in Hong Kong for the benefit of Hong Kong. So, this slowly walk down the history of Hong Kong. This has brought us to the present. In the present, the Fraser Institute ranks Hong Kong as the number one freest economy in the world. In order to attain this status, their economy is measured on several key indicators, and the ones that I think are most important are taxation, regulations, tariffs. By the way, tariffs, Bastiat said a tariff is like a negative railroad. They hinder trade. They slow everything down. So it's like a railroad running in reverse. The stability of their money supply, the security of their banking system, things like that. So I think those things that I mentioned are probably the most important thing. And they have the number one freest economy. They are the number one richest economy. There's kind of a correlation there, I think. And so I thought, let's present this to our listeners as a thought experiment. What if Jefferson became a republic and it operated under a similar or even better economic system, and they had even less government interference than Hong Kong, for instance? So just think about that again. What if Jefferson was operating under a similar or even improved economic system than Hong Kong is?
And for our listeners, who are not from our region, we need to clarify that we are talking about a region that is in Northern California and Southern Oregon. But for the most part, what we're currently working on is an area that is currently identified as Siskiyou County, which is in Northern California.
Yes, but other counties in this region may elect to join them in the future. But for now, it would only be Siskiyou County, and that's all it needs to be.
That's good enough for me.
It's good enough for me too. There are ways to still get your products to a port and ship them all around the world. There are ways to still be free and independent thing. But what if they were operating under that kind of economic system where they had surveyed all the things that work in the world, and they had chosen the very best of the best, and they had those economic advantages? What if Jefferson became a hub for all the trade that takes place on the edge of the Pacific, that is where it comes in contact with the Americas, North and South America? What if they were that hub? Because that's what Hong Kong became, just a little tiny, it's basically a couple of big hills that we would see on the Oregon coast all the time. They're like headlands. The sea hasn't washed away all the harder rock, so we have someone in the chat saying Humboldt County. Well, if we got Humboldt County, we'd be in Fat City there, because they have Eureka's a really good port, and we would have access to the water, which is the best way to ship things. But you don't necessarily have to have a port to be successful. I mean, and I want you to just kind of close your eyes for a minute and think, what other really, really rich, it's a really, really, really wealthy nation, has been very successful without having a port? Is anybody in chat, first person in chat to type out the name of this nation? I'll give them a shout out. I'll give you a hint. It's in Europe. Okay, so we don't have anybody thinking.
Sorry, Miner Dave. Applegate is not the right answer.
Yeah, it's not, and it's not in Europe either. But it doesn't mean that what you said wasn't true, because I think that's true. But the nation I'm thinking of is Switzerland. So, what if Jefferson became a worldwide banking center, as Switzerland has become?
Without banksters jumping out of steps, right?
Yeah. What if they had a banking system that isn't run by a central bank full of criminals that debase the money supply to enrich themselves? That they did away with, they countered it. They thought of fractional reserve banking as fraud, which it is. And they returned to honest banking, and they had assets backing up the deposits that were there, so that people could get their money back out of the bank anytime they wish. And there's no such thing as a run on the bank, because all the money that is put in the bank is still there. And people say, well, how do they make any money? Well, they make money by charging people to keep their money safe. There's lots of ways banks can make money, and we don't want to worry about the details, but for 20 years we had that kind of banking system in the United States, and it was awesome. It was from towards the end of the Jackson administration to the Van Buren administration. It was a beautiful thing. And it ended when the Civil War came in, but what if Jefferson could do that? I mean, it wouldn't be hard to set up. You just have to look at the way Switzerland did it and do it. What if Jefferson became a haven for inventors and innovators who just want to live in a free economy to develop their products in a hassle-free way to export them around the world? So, well, someone disagrees that Switzerland is not a great place for banking. I want to tell you that Switzerland is the center of all the banking systems in the world. Now, have they been corrupted? Yeah, probably some. But we don't have to follow that part of it. We can keep the original intent when they were still being successful.
London is a central area for banking too.
And London's pretty corrupted though.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
City of London is the center of the bankster corruption.
City of London is a sovereign identity also within the nation of Great Britain. So, if they have the ability to make a republic, they have all these advantages that they don't have now. If they go to make a state, none of these advantages would be possible because they still are working under the laws of the United States, which would restrict any of these things from happening. And so, before last week, we talked a lot about the things that had happened in the past that was going to be detrimental to the formation of the state and be less detrimental to the formation of the republic. And those things are real, and I think those are real advantages, and I think they should be considered. But the things that are the future, these things they dwarf the importance of those things that have happened in the past. The future, the new course that you set Jefferson on, that Siskiyou County becomes Jefferson, the new course that it embarks on, and it doesn't have to have any other counties attached to it. If it just does it by itself, I'm going to move there tomorrow. I mean, it's that simple. I want to be in a place where I can be free, and that's going to be the freest place on the planet if they set it up right. And if they do that, I want to be there. And I think a lot of other people will want to be there too. And probably people with better ideas than I have.
I'll be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's Drew he's an innovator in aquaponics. And he has to jump through so many hoops, and he's a guy that doesn't even want to comply with stuff. He just ignores a lot of their stuff they send him, but he still has to jump through a lot of hoops just to get a permission to grow food, healthy food that's not radioactive for people to consume. He has to comply with all these regulations that have nothing to do with the quality of the food.
I can't open carry a live bass without a permit.
Yeah.
It's against Oregon state law.
I know. So anyway, he could further develop this aquaponics system so there could be home units that people could give they could be growing their own food in a greenhouse with an aquaponics system so they could have fresh fish. I mean, really fresh fish. Just go in and net one and clean it and cook it up for dinner. I mean, it could be a reality, and it could make it so, once he figures out, how to make it economically viable for people, he can make it so cheaply probably that anyone could afford one. And it would be, everyone would have that as part of their backyard. It would be just something that you don't want to live without, because that would be a major source of cutting down your food bill at the grocery store. And you don't have to buy the Monsanto crap and all the processed food. You could grow your own quality food to stay healthier. And right there, that's something where the regulations, the taxation, the barriers to trade that the United States puts up, they slow down development of things like this. And this is just a simple aquaponics program. What if we had people that are working on things like Cody Wilson, and he's developing the 3D printing, and he's developed that, and he wants to come here and further develop that and be able to make 3D plastic guns that work. So that'd be huge. And there's other things that can be developed with 3D printing. This guy is brilliant. He's one of the smartest people. In fact, Jeff Berwick, who's been a guest on our show twice, and I love Jeff Berwick. Jeff, if you're listening to this on a podcast, we love you. You come back anytime you want. You're a brilliant guy. He was feeling kind of bummed out today because only 5,000 people have seen his our Anarchast. I almost have to stop and visualize the word before I say it. Only 5,000 people have viewed his Anarchast of the Cody Wilson interview. And man, that interview is hot. And that guy, Cody Wilson, one of the smartest people on the planet. I tell you, if you have a free place called Jefferson, it used to be Siskiyou County, it's a free place to do business, people like that are going to flock to Jefferson. And you're going to have all the smartest, most productive people on the planet are going to want to live there. And you're going to have Hong Kong in America. In North America, I'll put it that way, not the country America, in North America. You're going to have a economic hub that's going to be a model for the rest of the world, how to make prosperity happen. Excuse me. See, in every aspect, except for the port, and that may still be happening if Del Norte County could become part of this, or even Coos and Curry County in Oregon. Coos Bay is also an awesome port. But in every other aspect, Jefferson can emulate Hong Kong's success by becoming a republic. They don't have to worry about this stuff with a port, because as we see in Switzerland, they become very successful without a port. You don't have to have a port to be prosperous and viable. Okay, next part of this is, I lost my way in my notes here. That's what happens when you go off script and talk a little bit. It won't be difficult to copy what has been done in Hong Kong, but it will require intelligently directed hard work to achieve what has been done there. I mean, it isn't going to just happen when someone snaps their fingers. Jax, you're really funny. It made me laugh out loud on the air. We're going to have concealed fish permits. That's great.
Well, yeah, but we're really getting into the details here. Is there a difference between, let's just say live carry and dead carry? Okay. So there's a huge difference there. And I was going to type this out, but this is starting to get really, really complex here. So let's just go with this for a bit, because we have plenty of time, so we can.
Yes, we do.
This. So, okay, I can't open carry, nor can I conceal carry a live bass. Okay, that would be against the law. So, how can I legally carry a bass? In some cases I could. Let's just say that I have to have a permit. Okay, and getting a permit is not easy. So it's not easy to open carry or conceal carry a live bass or any fish for that matter in the region where we live without a permit. So a permit requires paying a fee, numerous inspections, and that is of the site that the fish is being transported or carried to. Okay, so you go through that, and it takes a long time. It might take you 6 months or so to get to that process. So let's talk about dead fish or dead bass. Can I open or conceal carry a dead bass? Well, that depends upon a few things. Let's say that you have a customer who wants to buy the dead bass from you because they want to cook it and eat it, or cook it for someone else and feed it to them, and they'll eat it. Well, can you do that? Well, perhaps, but that depends. Are you going to clean it first? If you're going to clean it first, well, that's processing. If you're going to process it, you have to be approved by the USDA and various health departments and subjected to numerous inspections and massive upgrades and whatnot. So you have to be careful. You could kill the fish, not clean it, and then transport it, and then you're okay. However, let's say that you caught the fish in a lake. That's a whole other issue, because you have to have a fishing license to do that. And so you could get yourself in a real peck of trouble if you're catching a fish with or without a fishing license, and then transport it while it's still alive to another location without a permit, even if you intend to kill it and eat it after that. So my business can get very complicated. If I have a customer who would prefer to kill their own fish, they want them live and they want to dispatch them themselves, which theoretically that could happen. It's very likely that I'd have a customer that would want to do such a thing, but that would be against the law. In order to do that site, where that customer is would have to apply for a permit with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And they probably would not obtain that. They'd have to build a berm around their restaurant or whatever and dump cement down all of their drains. And, and then perhaps they'd be able to get a permit to receive a live bass so that they could kill it, because the bass might escape. This sounds ridiculous, but it's real. This is the reality of the layers of government. We've got decades and decades of government and layers of laws and revised statutes and rules and so on and so forth. And then there's this overlap, and Chuck, we could go on about this for forever when you start talking about the overlap of various government agencies at different levels. Like, for example, let's just say you wanted to receive live fish at your restaurant so that you could dispatch them yourself, or maybe you want to serve them to your customers live. Maybe you've got some really, really intense customers that like live sushi or something. Well, you're going to have to comply with the regulations of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So if you build a berm around your site in order to comply, well, that'll probably violate some other codes. The fire department might have an issue with that because it'll make it difficult for people to flee your building in the event of a fire. So it could make it impossible to comply completely. And another thing too is that if you pour concrete down your drains so that the fish can't escape in the event of a flash flood, you're going to be violating plumbing codes. So, there's this overlap. And if you really get down to it and you start complying with all of these regulations exactly, you couldn't do anything. And I'm starting to believe that that's what they want. And the people need to decide, is that what they want? Do you want all business activity to stop? Do you want all human activity to stop? That's where we're going with this, with too much regulation, too much government, layers and layers and layers of government from the city level to the county level to the state level to the federal level to the global level. Let's throw the UN into this mess. It just keeps going. Eventually there will be a galactic level, it just gets insane. Imagine that. It's got to stop. And if you've been in business, at all, like Chuck and I have, been in business for most of our lives. I've owned businesses for decades. Since I was in my late teens, and the government has always been there getting in my way, making it hard for me to succeed, telling me what I can't do, setting restrictions on what I can do, even if it's what the customer wants. And so, and that's the problem. That's really a huge problem right there, where if you're trying to adapt to the market and deliver what the customer wants, and the government is there saying, well, we don't want you to do that. We have a rule that says that you can't do that, but no one else is harmed by it. It boils down to, where is the victim? There's no victim. Client wants this. Well, we say you can't do that. And that's what we need to stop. That's why we need a restart. That's why we want a new republic, because we need to wipe the slate clean. We need a do-over, because it's become way too complex to the point where things really can't get done anymore. And people want to have jobs. Other people want to start businesses. Other people have ideas, but we've gotten to this point where you can't start a business and make a profit. You can't create a job profitably. As we came into the so-called Great Recession, which has probably been a depression that started in 2007, but let's just go with the Great Recession that began coincidentally in 2008, and you saw businesses shutting their doors, laying people off, and with my business, this is with my real estate business, I worked harder and I beat the bush and I obtained more business, and instead of laying people off, I was able to create jobs. Nobody got laid off. I actually hired more people instead. But my unemployment rate doubled, and then it just kept doubling. But I didn't lay anybody off. Nobody was on the dole. My account hadn't been charged for anything, but my unemployment rate continued to go up. And how is that fair? How does that make any sense? Where my tax goes up because other businesses failed, the last man standing has to pay for everybody's unemployment payments. It doesn't make sense, and it's continuing to go on like that. And so that's where you, as an entrepreneur, you get to the point where you don't even want to try anymore. You have to take a risk. You have an idea, you want to do something, you risk capital. The good thing is that you create jobs along the way. But when it gets to the point that you're carrying the full load and you're making less than everybody else because of it, what's the point? Why even try? And that's where we are today. That's where we are. And
that's exactly right.
It can't go on like this. There will be no economic growth. There will be no jobs. There will be no opportunities, and people will be turning to the government for help. And that's where it's all going. And that's why we have to stop this and turn it back. We could get back to prosperity. It's very easy. We have to get the government out of our lives.
Yes. And I was getting ahead of where I am. I was get back to what I was saying here, that I found my place in my notes while you pitch it for me for a little bit there. And by the way, everything that Drew said is exactly right. And if anything, he's understating the problem. It's incredible how it's like these people in the governing bodies, either the state or the federal governments, they sit around all day thinking up ways they can be more intrusive into your life. It's just like they can find ways to justify their existence and maybe even have to expand their department, and there's a better chance of them being promoted up the ladder. And so their economic incentive is to grow the government, make it bigger, and further regulate and strangle the very people that fund their existence. So they don't seem to understand that they're committing suicide with their actions.
And through this depression, I'm going to call it that because it is an economic depression.
Well, it's the economic statistics. If you calculated them the same way they did during the Great Depression, they're much worse.
Sure. Absolutely. What we've seen is a growth in government jobs and a reduction in private sector jobs. Another disturbing trend that I've seen is an expansion of huge corporate level businesses. Let's just take the retail sector. We've seen an expansion there due to easy money, cheap money, low interest rates, but a retrenchment in small local businesses. And that's not good. I remember when I was running property up in the Seattle area, and the region was completely controlled by Boeing. This was before Microsoft really took off. And so, if Boeing was expanding, the region was doing good, and then they'd lay off 10,000 people. And every job at Boeing created 3 jobs in the market, service and retail jobs and so on and so forth. So, I'd look at charts. The company I worked for had been in business since the late 1950s. And so they had lots and lots of data that I had access to. And, I'd see charts that just would show, employment at Boeing and, residential vacancy rates. And, and Boeing just controlled the entire region. And so what I'm trying to say is that when you have like areas like Medford, for example, they seem to try hard to attract some sort of big industry, big company. But from my experience, they're always trying to crush and destroy small business, just make small business really, really hard. But what they're doing is they're weakening their economy. They'll make their economy so that it is less resilient when there is an economic downturn. And that's another subject that we could get into right there. However, you want economic diversity, and you have that when you have smaller businesses, instead of one big mega corporation employing everybody. That's a very risky economy, and you'll see things happen where that industry has a down cycle, and then you have cities going bankrupt. Let's talk about Detroit. But that's been
Detroit's not the only one. There's some cities in California,
and that's been due to outsourcing too. But that's what happens though. If that area had more economic diversity, it wouldn't be in the trouble that it's in today. What I wanted to get to, that reminded me that the business cycle is due to government intervention. When you've got the Fed intervening and controlling the money supply the way that it does, that causes what people recognize as being the business cycle. And so many of us who have studied economics and business have been trained to believe that the business cycle is just the natural order of things. But it's not. The business cycle is completely due to Fed manipulation, Fed intervention. And that's another problem. It puts us all at risk, where anybody who's bought real estate, within the last 6 or 7 years, understands the economic cycle. There's so many assets. I was just thinking about this today. So many assets that you could invest in that used to be relatively risk-free, inflation-proof investments that have gone down in value massively and are not recovering. And that's due to federal government regulation.
Yeah, exactly what you're talking about. Those assets, depending on what they're connected to, they may never recover.
Right. Yeah. And this is all due to manipulation. You ease the money supply, bump up the money supply, and suddenly the values of certain assets just start exploding. Look at the stock market right now. That's a perfect example. The stock market is an indicator of inflation. You just look at it. If we're not seeing inflation in other places, like in energy, for example, it doesn't mean it's not there. It's just it's all going right to the guys who get the money first, which those are the banksters, and it's going in the stock market.
Right.
And so,
yeah.
We're not seeing it. We're not seeing it so much on Main Street because that's where it's all going right now.
We made this point several times last week, and I'm making it at least for the second or third time this week. Is that the problems we have, yeah, sure, Salem's a pain in the ass, and so is Sacramento. That's Oregon's capital and California's capital for those of you out of the area. But the biggest problem is the one in Washington, D.C. And by Siskiyou County becoming the Republic of Jefferson, or the Jefferson Republic, they eliminate that problem. Bam, it's gone. They also get rid of that other problem, that annoyance of the state of California. And the state does plenty of harm too, but it's nowhere near what comes out of Washington, D.C. And the state of California, to my knowledge, hasn't declared war on any foreign countries yet. So they got that going for them. That's a major improvement over our federal government. But if Jefferson becomes I was going to finish this.
Go ahead.
If Jefferson becomes a state, if they're really not going to be that much more successful economically speaking, because they still have to deal with the federal government. And that's where most of the regulations, most of the taxation, most of the barriers to trade and movement, and most of the corruption is because that's where most of the power is. And that's the big thing. And if you go to a Jefferson Republic instead, you're going to eliminate that. And then now you have the ability to become a Hong Kong, a Singapore, a really vibrant, successful economy. And the 44,000 residents of Siskiyou County will be swamped with people wanting to come in and go there and lift the level of living, the standard of living for everybody. Because the people like out there, like Cody Wilson, which you talked about here, people like that, they don't want to live being not free. They're smart people. They understand how this is screwing them too. And if there's a place where you can go and live without being harassed and having to worry about your newest thing is going to land you in prison, that's where you're going to want to go and live. Where they respect your life and your liberty and your pursuit of happiness. That's okay. Back to what you were saying, Drew.
Oh, well, what I was getting at, which I've ranted about this many times before on prior episodes, is that we still have some pretty hardcore tyranny on the local level. Let's just take my big pet peeve right now, fire inspections. God help you if you own a business, really. I mean, you just give it all up. You've got your Fourth Amendment's toast. You own a business, forget it. You have no Fourth Amendment right whatsoever. It's just, you just have the government in your face all the time making insane demands upon you, and they've got no concept of reality. So, this thing, like in, Southern Oregon, this has always been the case in Medford, where you've got a business, the fire marshal pokes his head around and makes you a punch list of a bunch of junk you got to take care of to make the place safe, and so they just walk into your business, look around, and make a list of stuff that they deem not safe. Oh, you've got an extension cord. Well, yeah, but I just plugged it in today because I needed to use my drill. Well, if it's just temporary, well then you need to put a piece of tape on it with a date so that when we come in to inspect, you can prove that you don't use that extension cord for that drill all the time. I'm not exaggerating. That's the way that it is. It's insane. That's outrageous. Nobody should tolerate this kind of stuff. But this is what happens. And they go in, they'll come into your business and they'll go, oh, well, we don't like that surge protector thingy that you've got your computer and your printer and all that stuff plugged into, and the cord's too long, and you need to have a new circuit in a new receptacle, and get this done by this date, or else, and then you've got to go and spend a bunch of money, and so they just come in, they just walk in, they look in your closets, go through your office, check all your stuff, trying to find, things to write you up for, and then order you to take care of it and send you a bill for the inspection that you didn't consent to. So that's just one thing on the local level. and then you've got property tax on top of that. Even if you don't have any equipment, say you've got a vast law library or something.
What about building permits?
And you've got building permits too, completely. You could just go on and on and on and on. You're really a serf in this system.
This is how corrupt the system was.
You don't own anything, and it's all laid out that it's for the purpose of safety, but that's not it. It's about control. It's about justifying the existence of the government and allowing the government to have power over you, and the government needing an ever expanding tax base. And it needs a reason to exist. It wants to be wanted. It needs to be needed. And so there will always be people getting together in rooms, sitting around, busybodies trying to figure out what to do. We got to do something. We got to stop this or whatever.
Yeah.
We need a budget. Next year's got to be bigger.
That's how they get more. Yeah. But I got to tell you folks about how the building department in Medford used to run. Now the person that was in charge of it had to resign because eventually, people started to realize that this is totally wrong what's going on. But, he was not I don't think he was consciously an evil person. And I'm not going to name his name because I don't want to get sued, but, he was a structural engineer, which is a good choice for having somebody run your building department. And he was in charge of plan reviews and making sure that the specifications on the plans were adequate to support the use for the building was intended for. And in that respect, he did a pretty good job. But he also, he wanted to have more money on the side, so he started a consulting engineering business. And he thought that it was legitimate because he didn't, do any of his business practices inside, the city limits of Medford. But the people who are contractors in the city limits of Medford, they do business all over Jackson County and Josephine County and even down in Siskiyou County. And if they didn't, if they were customers of his, then their projects they did in Medford, even if he didn't work on those projects, they just seemed to go smoother. You know what I mean? And eventually enough people who didn't use his consulting services got kind of pissed because they seemed like they were getting the runaround in Medford when they tried to do things. So they started to air their complaints, and the guy had to step down and resign. And he actually was lucky he didn't end up in prison. I think what he was doing was blatantly illegal. And even if he was a person of good intent, he was trying to do things the right way, it didn't look that way to the people who were getting harassed. So, even if he was legitimately harassing them, they could come, hey, what's going on here? So that's how government doesn't protect you. Government it abuses you day in and day out. Back to Jefferson and Hong Kong. As I said before, Hong Kong has no natural resources and just a great harbor. It's huge. It can put a bunch of ships in there. It's an awesome structure for as a harbor, and that's kind of what led to this development as a center of trade, so I guess you could call that its resource. But Jefferson has so much more than Hong Kong in terms of the abundant mineral resources, which we talked about last week. And there's over $1 trillion worth of just out of titanium in the Siskiyou Mountains. Just titanium. I'm not talking about gold, silver, copper, lead, mercury, everything else. Just titanium. They have dense forests, and these forests, despite what you hear on the news, if you're not from around here and you hear about clear cutting, and these forests are so dense and so thick it looks like a green carpet laying on the foothills and mountains of this region. These trees, if we don't cut them down, they burn them down in the summer when the lightning strikes come through. We have to be thinned out at least to protect them. You notice when they have a forest fire, it always burns on all the federally managed lands right up to the border with a privately owned forest, and it stops. For some reason, the people that have these private forests seem to be able to manage that property a little better. So that's just another little insight about how maybe the Republic of Jefferson could better organize and manage the resources, if they could make them into private property so they'd be taken care of right.
You're talking about the tragedy of the commons.
Yes. The Tragedy of the Commons, Garrett Hardin. It's a great book. It's absolutely, fabulous. The guy is not so much, I don't know what I don't know if I want to put a label on him because I don't know exactly what he believes, but, the essay Tragedy of the Commons is exactly right on perfect, and he's I guess there's a lot of libertarian ideas in there, I guess, but he really understands that property ownership was kind of a key to better management of the property. And that's a fabulous thing to read. If you have children, make sure they read it. It's not written at a very high level. He wrote it simply so that everybody could understand it. Now, in every other aspect of their economy, Jefferson can do exactly as Hong Kong has done. They can copy Switzerland's banking when, the way they started becoming the banking empire of the world before they became taken over by the banksters. I'm talking, and, they can do these things, and the state can't. The state of Jefferson will still come under the regulations of the federal government. They couldn't have a banking industry. Maybe they kind of could, but it wouldn't be as free and as secure as if they had one that was really a free market banking system. And they couldn't get the ultimate prize. They couldn't become this huge center because the system would be trying to keep them from expanding, becoming great like that, because they don't want a threat to their existence. They don't want all the money becoming deposited in the Republic of Jefferson because that's the safest place on the planet to put it. They don't want that to happen. That could happen. And you have all those resources in your area. People are going to want to move there to be close to their resources, and they're going to use those resources to invest in new technologies and innovations. It's like I can't even imagine 5% of what's possible there. It's human ingenuity is endless, and it keeps on improving. But we're talking a little bit about once it becomes private property, it becomes better managed, and it also becomes more productive. And we talked about this on our Thanksgiving show. We talked about the Pilgrims and how they, all the hardships they went through just to get on the boat to come to the New World. 102 of them set off, and they sailed across the Atlantic, and they had these horrible storms, and no one perished on that journey over. Just almost a miracle. And they got down the shores, and they prayed for their deliverance, and they gave glory to God, and they started to live their lives, and they started to die. Just bam, bam. 45 people died in the first 4 months. 45 out of 102 died. And one of those people I have found out since that program, my dad actually listened to the podcast, I think. One of those people, he informed me, was a relative of ours. My father's my stepfather, so I'm not a direct descendant of him, but my father is. And he was a direct descendant of him through his son, who came over on a boat the following year. And that's amazing that these people are here. There's 102 of them, 45 of them died in that first year, and they barely have enough seed to get through the next, enough stuff to get through the next year, and another shipload of people are delivered there. Now what are they going to do? They start rationing it out and making sure that there's going to be enough to survive, everybody to survive, but they don't know what they're going to do for the next year.
So you're talking about Jamestown?
I'm talking about Plymouth Rock.
Okay.
The Pilgrims. And so they were just lucky that they had as a governor. In fact, their governor that was supposed to be there was one of the people that died. So William Bradford was elected governor. And they're just lucky that they elected a guy who had read he'd read a book written by a person who had refuted all the ideas in Plato's Republic, which in Plato's Republic was a real socialist drivel. And so he had refuted those ideas and explained how important private property was. And it was kind of just prior to Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations by about 100 years, but probably influenced Adam Smith to some extent too. And he realized that the best chance they had to survival was to split up the property that was there, to give it to the people, the settlers, and to tell them that's their property and they could have everything that they produced on that property. And they would just, all they had to do is agree to help to retire this debt, and their share of the debt each year would be this much, and they would just have to pay that amount every year. It wasn't a percentage of what they made or whatever. They just had to help retire that debt because that enabled them to come to this place. And they all agreed to that. They all consented to it, so it wasn't forced. And everybody thought that was a good idea. They went off. That's what led to the first Thanksgiving. Now, private property rights, it not only protects the property, it produces more wealth. And by taking these lands, these forests, I don't know what percentage of Siskiyou County is owned or operated by the federal government, but in Jackson County, they control over 50% of the land in Jackson County. I'm sure it's above that in Siskiyou County because it's less densely populated. It's probably more like 70%. You take that land away from the federal government, which they are horrible at managing it, and you turn it into privately owned property, it's going to be more productive. It's going to be better cared for. They're going to have fewer forest fires of less intensity to destroy less natural resources. You're going to have more people mining, and because they own the property, they don't want to turn it into a toxic waste dump. Because they own it, they want to make sure it has value, so at the end of their life, when they can't mine anymore, they can sell it to the next guy, and he doesn't have to come in and buy a bunch of problems that he has to clean up before he can start. He wants to keep it clean and productive and, environmentally safe, because that's the value of his property. It's kind of like an annuity for him as he retires. So when you own something, you take better care of it. Do you take better care of your car or a rental car? Do you take better care of your house or a motel room that you rent for a night? It's just common sense, and that would all be possible. All of that would be possible in a republic of Jefferson. It would not be possible in the state of Jefferson because they would still have that 1,000-pound elephant in Washington D.C. And I'll say the 1,000-pound elephant alongside the 1,000-pound donkey Indians. So I'll let you know that I'm not partisan. And it would still be causing the same problems, most of the same problems they have here. There'd be different problems, but they're actually bigger problems. So this is now the case for the formation of Jefferson Republic through illegal institutions such as the Federal Reserve, unconstitutional measures such as the income tax. The United States has begun to die as a nation. And when I say die, I mean it's in its death throes right now. I don't think there's anything that the 44,000 residents of Siskiyou County can do to reverse or stop this decay. They are basically powerless. The powers that are destroying this nation are almost isolated and immune from anything that we as citizens can do. They act. They have control of the propaganda media. They have control of the newspapers. They have control. Just today, actually a couple days ago, Dinesh D'Souza, who was working on he put out a movie that was highly critical of Barack Obama, and he's putting out another movie that's also going to be highly critical of the government and Barack Obama in person. And it's supposed to be released on the 4th of July. And he was just arrested. And he's being arrested for supposedly bundling some election campaign funds for a friend of his. It was a college friend that helped him edit some college publication when they both went to school. And he's being arrested because he's now an enemy of the state. And so they selectively enforce laws that they don't follow. And they persecute their enemies with those laws. And that's what's happening.
He's guilty of thought crime.
Yes. But they're not going to prosecute him for that because that sounds bad. They're just prosecuting for a crime that they do all the time with immunity.
Yeah.
They don't ever have to suffer that. I mean, during the Clinton administration, Charlie Tree, who owned a 2-bit Chinese restaurant in Little Rock, Arkansas, was bringing bags with sequentially numbered money orders for hundreds of thousands of dollars to the presidential reelection campaign office. Paper sacks full of these money orders, and they were all bought at one time by one person, and they were made out to be all these fake names. That guy, nothing happened to him. And it's just incredible. This guy, anyway, I'm getting off track here a little bit, but this is symptomatic of the decay that's happening and the power that the government has.
These are very dangerous times.
They are.
I mean, if you look at this situation, people should be really freaked out right now. Something like this should not happen. We're clearly under a tyranny now. And I mean, just because you've criticized the government. I mean, you and I criticize the government all the time. Openly do it. Well, probably every single day we openly criticize this government. And so it starts with this guy, and how far does it go? I mean, of course it's going to be the most influential people first, but eventually it'll be everybody. Everybody speaks out.
Yeah.
That means that everybody needs to speak out.
It does. I mean, I had that thought this week too. There's, I keep remembering that, the quote from the Nazi Germany, the Protestant minister who said that, I didn't stand up for the Jews because I wasn't Jewish. And I didn't stand up for the communists because I wasn't a communist. And I didn't stand up for the gypsies because I wasn't a gypsy. And I didn't stand up for the mentally retarded because I wasn't mentally retarded. Didn't stand up for the Catholics because I'm a Protestant. When it came for me, there was nobody left to stand up for me. And that's kind of where it's kind of leading. But I think as Siskiyou County, the best thing they can do, and if you're a voter in Siskiyou County right now and you're trying to make up your mind how you're going to come down on this issue, the best thing you can do is to vote for the secession and the formation of the Jefferson Republic, because this is what's going to happen. Under correct economic guidelines, Jefferson will become a prosperous economic engine. It will become a resource for this whole region, and eventually all of North America. That includes Mexico and Canada. That's what's happened to Hong Kong. That's what's happened to Singapore. They are resources for that whole region. The economic prosperity that flows out of there goes everywhere. And it goes to that region first. And the same thing could happen with Siskiyou County if it becomes the Jefferson Republic. Just as Hong Kong is now the economy that moves the economy of mainland China, Jefferson could be the economy that moves North America. And I didn't say America, I said North America. I mean Canada and Mexico will also benefit greatly from this if it becomes what it could be.
I also want to point out that this is up to the people themselves. It's up to them to choose how they want to live, what economic systems they wish to enact, how big they want their government. They will have that choice. And if the people want big government and piles of agencies, well, then they could have that. What I'm seeing in the state of Jefferson movement that disturbs me is a lot of talk of a tax base to fund such and such government agency that will be in charge of whatever. And what it just seems to me is that they're going along the same statist path that will they will end up in the same situation that they're currently in, but they feel better about it because it was their choice. And hopefully the people in Siskiyou County will make a different choice. And from what I've seen, there are many people who would like smaller government and less government intervention in their lives. I mean, getting to a point of having no government is very, very difficult. And of course, there's going to be a period of transition if the people vote for something like this. You have to ease into the changes, of course. And so there's a lot of issues that would need to be hashed out and dealt with. I mean, you don't want someone's grandma on the street, or something like that. So things have to be worked out in transition. But of course, when just by virtue of the fact that that the Republic would be a freer area with less regulation, it would attract business, promote innovation, jobs would be created, it would be prosperous. And
exactly, it's not going to only be prosperous. It's going to be an economic engine. It's going to make the areas outside of Jefferson more prosperous just because it's there.
And because it's prosperous, it can also be generous. The problem that we have in our current system is the warfare welfare state. And I know with some of you guys with Colorblind Justice and you, Chuck, and Miner Dave and a few others in the chat. I mean, we're well aware of what this means, the warfare welfare state, which is just taxing the productive people and then redistributing those resources so that they could either be squandered in programs that are supposed to help the poor and the needy, but really don't do very much, or completely wasted by turning the resources into bombs and weapons that are used to steal resources from other people and destroyed and taken from the middle class, and they get nothing for it. They're just poorer and weaker, and that's it. And so what we want is an economy. I'd say what I want. I don't want to speak for everybody. What I would like to see is an economy that is so prosperous that people. Obviously, you're going to have people that are needy. It just happens. Bad luck happens. Bad things happen. People need a leg up. Well, that's what charity is all about. You help your neighbor. And if you're doing good, you're going to help your neighbor, and you don't need the coercion of government to make you help your neighbor. I mean, do we really need that? Are we so immoral as people that we have to be forced to help our neighbor? That we have to be forced, through taxation, under threat of being thrown in a cage to help our neighbor? Really, are we that immoral? I don't think so. I think we can make that choice for ourselves, and you could help your neighbor, and that's the opportunity that we have right now. Are we moral, ethical people that can do the right thing without being forced to do so? I help my neighbor if she needs a hand with something. I go over, I've cleared out her drains, I've plunged her toilet. Nobody made me do it. I've trimmed hedges for her, done things like that. That's what you do. Nobody put a gun to my head. I wanted to do it. So, that's what we're looking at here. That's what society is all about. And that's what we have an opportunity to create a society where everybody can do well. And even that those who have, had bad luck and need a leg up will still be supported by the community, but not by force, not by coercion, not by threats, not by guys in costumes with weapons and badges forcing you to do things. It'll be a matter of choice, and people will do the right thing because they're capable of doing so. and they'll love their neighbor because that's what we're talking about, is taking things back to the local level, making decisions as a community.
Exactly.
And we're not talking about collectivism. We're talking about collective action, which is a totally different issue. You could have groups of individuals doing things together to make something happen. That's not
voluntarily.
It's voluntarily. It's not collectivism. It's collective action. Very different.
Yeah. And I'm going to just finish up. I'm going to sum up close the thoughts on my stuff about Jefferson Republic now, and then we can continue this discussion, because if I don't, I can't join in the thinking process of what you're saying very well, Drew. So I'm going to just backtrack a little bit here. I'm just going to read this so I'll get it done real quick. Just as Hong Kong is now the economy that moves the economy of mainland China, Jefferson would be the economy that moves North America. This act of secession, under the conditions and strategies that I have outlined, is the most patriotic act that any group of people could make. I'm going to say it again. It's the most patriotic act that any group of people could make. Now, if America is ever to regain its senses, it will have to be in this manner. Just as the stark contrast between East and West Germany led to the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, the economic collapse of the Soviet Union led to economic reforms, even though there weren't enough of them to be totally effective. The success of the Republic of Jefferson will be a powerful argument for free markets, less government, or even no government, possibly, no taxation, and most of all, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this can happen in my lifetime. So, those were my closing remarks. I think if you really love your country, people of Siskiyou County, this is the best thing you can do to help your country, is to show them the error of their ways by doing it the right way, and having them copy and follow your example to the road to prosperity. Okay, now, Drew, you said a whole bunch of stuff about collective action, voluntary societies. Do you know that before the Great Depression, before the government got involved in the charity, there used to be things called mutual aid societies? Did anybody in our audience ever heard of these things? They were very effective. They would voluntarily submit money as like a dues to these organizations, and they would collect these money when someone in their organization had medical expenses or got behind, lost their job and needed to make a house payment. They would be taken care of, and the people would all push together, get the person back on their feet and back to work and back being productive members of society. And they were really, really effective. And until government made an economy so bad, the Great Depression, that lasted so long, it lasted for 17 years. So we may still have a few more years left on this one, guys. Until that happened, these societies were very, very effective, and they worked very well. And that kind of system could easily be put into play in a place as small as Siskiyou County, 44,000 people. Mutual aid societies, a few of these societies still work. They're still in existence. Some of them have evolved into drinking societies. I mentioned that I was referring to the Elks and the Eagles. And no offense to fellas, I think you guys are great. You do a lot of good charitable works too, and there's nothing wrong with having a good time. And it's your life, you can make your own choices. But these organizations started out as mutual aid societies with people. The BPOE stands for Benevolent Protective Order of the Elks. Protective Order. They were a protection society. They were protecting each other. They were helping their neighbors, and it spread across the nation. It was a great idea. They have chapters all across the United States that were formed because it was a good idea. The Jefferson Republic is going to be a good idea, and that idea is going to spread all around the world. We can even improve on Hong Kong. We can improve on Switzerland. We can improve on Singapore. Those are 3 of the top 4 economies in the world. And we can do better. Because they still aren't doing everything right. So, I feel much better now.
As do I, Chuck. Well said. It's funny. We usually don't put a lot of planning into our episodes. It's just, it's free flow. I wasn't even sure what we were going to get into. Until about 4:00 this afternoon.
Yeah.
But I love it when our ideas kind of flow along in the same direction.
Yeah. And we're saying the same things, and we're not talking about little detailed things, and we bring up some of those as examples so people can see them a little more clearly, but we're talking about bigger ideas. You organize your society in a certain way, and everything's gonna flow almost like magic. And just kind of like our show does. We don't make it so tight and bind it so tight that we can't have other thoughts come into our mind as we're speaking and go off and not cover them. And they all come back together. It's part of this whole consciousness that we have about being free. It's really, really important. That's the one thing you can't get rid of if you want to be prosperous. You have to have freedom.
Also, look at the network as a whole here at UCY.TV that Jules has put together. There's so many of us here that produce content. None of us have to do anything. We agree to show up at a certain time every week, and it's some of the shows are on several times a week.
Mm-hmm. And people talk and they deal with things that are of great interest to them. And I haven't really ever heard a show that I didn't think was pretty good. I don't listen to them every day in every show that everybody makes. I don't have that much time, but when I do listen to them, I'm really impressed at the amount of time and effort that goes into what they have to say. It's very informative.
Yeah, I try to listen to the shows as often as possible, and of course I have my favorites, and there's some that I miss. I always liked In the Lie with Madison Rupert. That I really enjoyed that, but I don't think he's been doing his show. And I always try to catch Nuclear Hot Seat if I can. And I guess there's no excuse anymore because you can grab anything in the archives on here. And
yeah,
Anti-Media is great.
Last night I wanted to listen to her first show live because I thought
Dana Martin's new show.
Yeah, we had a part in her becoming this she's going to be a star. She's awesome. But we had a part in her becoming one of the members of the UCY network, and I was just really interested to hear. I missed it, but I was able to, put up the podcast and listen to the show afterwards, and I thought it was awesome. For a first show, it was a lot better than our first show. And she had her son Devin on, and he was really good too. And they just spoke the truth. They spoke the things that are close to their hearts, and it was I could feel that passion, and I understood exactly what they were saying just partly from the passion they have. They weren't just reciting things or reading things. They were. It was a great show. If any of you haven't heard her show, you can go to Try This at Home. It's Dana Martin's show, and here she has a podcast up from her first show. It's really good. And this is an example of spontaneous order.
Well, that's it. And
no one has a directive of what they're supposed to put on their program. They put on there what they want to have, and we come up with great content at the end. It organizes itself, and it becomes content, and it's good.
Right. And I don't watch TV anymore, so I check the schedule on here, and I really love it. What is it on Tuesday? There's like a double header with Prepper Chicks and Primer Time. That's really cool. I really enjoy that time. And
I think Primer Time is really popular. I listened to one of their shows, and they had a ton of people in chat.
Yeah, both those shows just are really great, and I love Nathan's show, Live Free FM, and a lot of the material he covers is in keeping with what we believe in, and
then Dane about the chemtrailing. And
yeah, there's some fantastic stuff there, but nobody has to do this. Nobody's on a contract, and all of this happens like clockwork. and nobody's forced to do anything. It's all voluntary, and people show up and do their thing, and it spontaneously organizes just like that, and it happens. And here it is. We have a network, and there's content.
And there are people putting energy into the system. I mean, Jules does an amazing amount of work to keep everything running, but she doesn't tell us what to say. We come on here and talk for 2 hours, and we go on with our life and spend 6 days thinking about what we're going to talk about next week.
Right. And I think that she would like it if we spent more time on Fukushima. So I would like to touch on that just a little bit tonight. We don't have very much time left, but we are seeing a collapse of life in the Pacific Ocean. The sardines are pretty much gone. Fish harvests off the coast of British Columbia have totally collapsed. The fishing industry there is just gone right now. Gray whales and humpback whales are heading out further out into the ocean, trying to forage for food. There's definitely a problem. Something's going on. We're seeing really bad things going on in Alaska with the seals over there. Lots of problems with the seals and losing their hair and lesions on their skin and problems with their organs. And so and that's just the north part of the Pacific, but it extends all the way down. And we've talked about this in past episodes, but the Pacific is collapsing, and some scientists suspect that is due to Fukushima, but nobody's coming out with it. And that's the problem with this.
Yeah, and this is again the state power. Every scientist out there, they all know what's the problem, but they're afraid if they say what the problem is, they'll never ever get a government research grant again in their life.
Right. And when I was called by David Knight from InfoWars to talk about what I wanted to discuss during my interview on the Nightly News, I said I want to talk about Plumegate. And he goes, Plumegate? I said, yeah, I want to talk about the corporate and government cover up of what's going on with this, and let's get into the EPA's RadNet. And finally that's starting to make its way into the mainstream media that the EPA's RadNet failed to warn the public that there was something going on. What's the point? What's the point of having this? What's the point of having an EPA? What's the point of having a RadNet that's supposed to warn us if something's happening? And that if it's shut down or even the monitors that were functioning, some of the hard data was scrubbed to conceal it so that you would know what was going on. So are these things there to really protect us? We have this society that just really harps on safety to make you safer. But it doesn't really, and it isn't there to make you safe. It's there to gather information for other people, the powers that should not be, not for you. The information is not for you. The agencies are not there to protect you. They're there to control you or to conceal information. It's a complete waste of resources, complete waste of time. That the EPA does a lot of damage to industry, a lot of damage to small business.
It's probably the greatest con job that's ever come down the pike, to convince all the people that there's a danger that only the government can protect you from, and that doesn't really exist, so that all the time that nothing happens, they can say it's because we're here. That's why nothing has happened. We haven't had any further attacks because we are here to protect you. And it never was there in the first place. As we covered on our 9/11 program, 9/11 was an inside job. The government story makes no sense whatsoever. The official story doesn't account for how Building 7 came down. It doesn't account how all three buildings fell within seconds into their own footprint. It's a total sham. And that was used to start a war that has killed thousands of American soldiers, and God knows how many people in the Middle East, the citizens in the Middle East, and put us further into debt. And it's just all because of a lie, and the Patriot Act and the NDAA and the TSA agents, the Homeland Security. That's all a result of a lie from our government. Oh, that's a big surprise.
Yes. And yet people just continue to fund these things without question because they're afraid not to.
And a lot of people Alex Jones talks about this a lot in his show, the people that get sucked into these cons, they'll continue to send money to these con men because they don't want to believe that they were wrong. They would rather think that this is still going to work out somehow. And they'll send them more money and more money. The Nigerian Prince Abubu.
Oh yes.
And that's
scam letters.
There's that same mentality going to people you were lied to in your con, but you still, my country, right or wrong, I'm going to support that lie because that's my country.
I get similar con letters, but they're not from Nigeria. They're usually from some government agency demanding that I file some form or something, and they're like, well, if you do this, you could pay us this much money and maybe in the future you get money back, like magic. It's the same thing. It's a Nigerian scam. If you're paying into the social security system, you're subject to a Nigerian scam. Probably something that's a bigger con than a Nigerian scam.
Exactly.
The biggest con, you're not going to get that money, sucker. And
if you're under age 40, you will never see a penny. And if you do, it won't buy anything. You might get $1 million, but that won't quite be enough to buy a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
That's the only way they can make this thing, pay out the way they said it's going to pay out. Is to base the money so badly that it's cheaper to burn it than it is to buy firewood with it.
Wow, that went by fast.
Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for listening.
Good night, you guys. Tune in next week, next Thursday.